Marcus Chen stood in the doorway of his daughter's bedroom, watching her stare blankly at the wall. The untouched sandwich he'd brought up an hour ago sat on her nightstand, curling at the edges. It was day 14. 14 days since 8-year-old Emma had eaten a proper meal. 14 days since his world had turned inside out. The pediatrician's words echoed in his mind from that morning's appointment. Her vitals are holding, but we're approaching dangerous territory. If she doesn't start eating soon, we'll need to consider hospitalization. The doctor had looked at him with a mixture of concern and suspicion, as if wondering what kind of father lets his child starve. Marcus didn't know what kind of father he was anymore. 6 months ago, he'd been a normal dad with a normal life. He worked as an architect, designed buildings, came home to dinner with his wife and daughter. They'd laugh about Emma's day at school, her adventures on the playground, her latest obsession with collecting smooth stones from the park. Life had been predictable, safe, beautiful in its ordinariness. Then Catherine died. A brain aneurysm, sudden as a lightning strike. One moment she was loading the dishwasher, humming along to the radio. The next, she was gone. Marcus had found her on the kitchen floor, and in that terrible instant, everything he'd built his life around shattered into pieces too small to ever put back together. Emma had stopped talking first. For 3 weeks after the funeral, she went completely silent. The child psychologist said it was normal, that grief manifested differently in children, that she needed time. Slowly, painfully, Emma had started speaking again, but something fundamental had changed. The light in her eyes had dimmed. She moved through the house like a ghost, present but not really there. Then 2 weeks ago, she'd stopped eating. Not dramatically, not all at once. First, she'd picked at her breakfast. Then she'd claimed her stomach hurt at lunch. By dinner, she'd refused everything. Marcus had tried everything he could think of. He'd made her favorite foods, mac and cheese with the fancy breadcrumb topping Catherine used to make. He'd bought pizza from the place she loved downtown. He'd even let her eat ice cream for breakfast, desperate for her to consume anything at all. Nothing worked. She'd sit at the table, stare at the plate, and shake her head. Sometimes tears would roll down her cheeks. Sometimes she'd just look at him with those enormous dark eyes, so much like her mother's, and whisper, "I can't, Daddy. I just can't." The school had called yesterday. Emma had fainted during recess. The nurse had taken one look at her, at the way her clothes hung loose on her shrinking frame, and had pulled Marcus aside with barely concealed alarm. "This is serious," she'd said, her voice low and urgent. "You need to get help. Today." So here he was, standing in the doorway, watching his daughter fade away before his eyes, feeling more helpless than he'd ever felt in his life. He was an architect. He solved problems. He took chaos and created order, took empty space and filled it with purpose and beauty. But he couldn't fix this. He couldn't fix his own child. Marcus walked into the room and sat on the edge of Emma's bed. She didn't look at him. He reached out and gently took her small hand in his. Her fingers were cold, so thin he could feel every delicate bone. "Emma, sweetheart," he said softly. "Please talk to me. Tell me what's wrong. Tell me how to help you." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, she whispered, "She's hungry, Daddy." Marcus felt his heart skip. "Who's hungry, baby? You're hungry? That's good. We can get you something to eat right now." Emma shook her head, and a single tear traced down her pale cheek. "Not me. Huh. And I don't know how to feed her anymore." Marcus felt cold dread settle in his stomach. He opened his mouth to ask what she meant, but Emma had already turned back to the wall, retreating into whatever private hell she'd been inhabiting for the past 2 weeks. That night, Marcus didn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by parenting books and printouts about childhood grief and eating disorders, trying to understand what was happening to his daughter. Trying to understand how to bring her back from wherever she'd gone. He had no idea that everything was about to change. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning. Marcus had taken emergency leave from work, unable to focus on blueprints and client meetings while his daughter wasted away. He'd spent the night researching inpatient treatment facilities, his heart breaking with each website he visited. The idea of Emma in a hospital, hooked up to feeding tubes, felt like admitting defeat. But what choice did he have? He was making coffee when he heard it. A voice, high and clear, floating through the open kitchen window. Singing. Marcus froze, the coffee pot halfway to his cup. He knew that voice. It was Emma. Marcus dropped everything and rushed to the window. The backyard spread out before him, overgrown and neglected since Catherine's death. Neither he nor Emma had the heart to tend the garden she'd loved so much. But there, in the middle of the wild grass and untamed roses, stood Emma in her pajamas, barefoot in the morning dew. She wasn't alone. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. Emma was kneeling in the dirt, and she was talking. Not just talking, she was animated, gesturing with her hands, smiling. Actually smiling. He hadn't seen her smile in 6 months. But there was nobody there. She was speaking to empty air, having what looked like an intense, engaging conversation with absolutely nothing. His first instinct was panic. Hallucinations. His daughter was hallucinating from malnutrition. He needed to call the doctor immediately, get her to the emergency room. But something made him pause. Something about the way Emma looked. She seemed more alive than she had in months. Color had returned to her cheeks. Her eyes were bright, focused, present in a way they hadn't been since Catherine died. Marcus quietly opened the back door and stepped onto the porch. Emma didn't notice him. She was completely absorbed in whatever she was doing. "I know you miss her," Emma was saying, her voice gentle. "I miss her too. So much it feels like my chest is going to break open sometimes. But Daddy says she's still with us, in our hearts. Do you think that's true?" Silence. Emma tilted her head as if listening. "Yeah," she said after a moment. "Yeah, I think you're right. It's not the same. Nothing is the same." Her voice cracked, and tears began streaming down her face. But she didn't look distressed. She looked relieved, like she was finally releasing something she'd been holding inside for too long. Marcus took a step forward, and a twig snapped under his foot. Emma's head whipped around. For a moment, she looked terrified, caught. Then her expression shifted to something Marcus couldn't quite read. Defiance mixed with hope. "Daddy," she said quietly. "I need to tell you something. And you have to promise not to think I'm crazy." Marcus crossed the yard and knelt beside her in the wet grass. Up close, he could see how fragile she'd become. Her collarbones jutted sharply beneath her pajama top. Dark circles ringed her eyes. But those eyes were alive again, burning with an intensity he'd thought he'd lost forever. "I could never think you're crazy, Emma. You can tell me anything." Emma bit her lip, clearly struggling with whether to trust him. Finally, she took a deep breath and said, "Mom's garden has someone living in it. Something living in it. And she's been so hungry since Mom died because Mom used to feed her, but I didn't know how, and I didn't know if you'd believe me, and I thought maybe if I didn't eat, she could have my food instead, but that didn't work because she doesn't eat people food, and I've been so scared and confused and I miss Mom so much." The words tumbled out in a rush, barely coherent. Marcus struggled to process what she was saying. His immediate reaction was concern. This was some kind of delusion, some coping mechanism Emma had created to deal with her grief. He needed to be careful, not to shame her or make her feel dismissed, but to gently guide her back to reality. But before he could speak, something extraordinary happened. The rose bush beside them, one of Catherine's prized antique varieties, began to move. Not from wind. There was no wind. The branches shifted and swayed as if pushed by invisible hands. Then the roses themselves began to change. Buds that had been tightly closed for weeks suddenly unfurled, blooming in fast-forward, impossible and beautiful. The air filled with their perfume, so strong and sweet it made Marcus dizzy. "She wants you to see her," Emma whispered. "She's been too weak, but she wants to try. For you. Because you're sad too." Marcus stared at the roses, his rational mind trying to find an explanation. A trick of the light. A delayed bloom triggered by temperature change. Anything except what his eyes were telling him was happening. The roses continued to open, one after another, until the entire bush was covered in magnificent pink blooms, each one perfect and pristine. Then he saw it. Or rather, he saw the outline of it. A shimmer in the air, like heat waves rising from summer pavement, but with form and intention. It was roughly human-shaped but smaller, more delicate. As Marcus watched, frozen in shock and wonder, the shimmer moved among the roses, and everywhere it touched, new blooms appeared. "What is it?" Marcus heard himself ask, his voice barely a whisper. "Mom called her the garden keeper," Emma said. "She said every really old garden has one, if you love it enough. Mom used to leave her special things. Honey water and crushed eggshells and coffee grounds. And she'd sing to her. That's what I was doing. Singing Mom's songs." The shimmer seemed to pulse at the mention of Catherine, and Marcus felt something impossible. A wave of emotion that wasn't his own. Grief. Loneliness. A desperate, aching hunger not for food but for connection, for purpose, for the loving attention that had sustained it. Marcus understood then, with a clarity that bypassed logic entirely. This thing, whatever it was, had been Catherine's. She'd cared for it, nurtured it, fed it with her love and attention. And when she died, it had begun to starve. Just like Emma. Just like him. His daughter had been trying to save it, the only way she knew how. Marcus sat in the garden for hours that first day, watching Emma interact with something he couldn't fully see or understand. The rational part of his brain kept insisting this was impossible, that grief had broken something in both of them, that they needed professional help. But the part of him that had loved Catherine, that had watched her spend countless hours in this garden with dirt under her fingernails and joy on her face, that part whispered that maybe impossible wasn't the same as untrue. Emma seemed transformed. She moved through the overgrown beds with purpose, pulling weeds and clearing debris, talking constantly to the shimmer that drifted beside her. Sometimes Marcus could almost see it clearly, a suggestion of features in the dancing air. Other times it vanished completely, leaving only the movement of plants in its wake. She says Mom used to make her a special drink, Emma explained, kneeling beside an overgrown bed of lavender. Water with honey and a tiny bit of milk, left in a blue bowl under the moon. And Mom would bury things for her. Fruit that had gone bad, vegetable scraps, crushed flowers. She'd dig them into the soil and sing while she worked. Marcus listened, remembering. Catherine had always been particular about the garden. She'd never thrown food waste in the regular trash, always composting it herself rather than using the city's green bin program. She'd said it needed to go directly into her garden, that it fed the soil better that way. He'd thought it was just her being environmentally conscious. Now he wondered what else he'd missed, what magic he'd walked past every day without seeing. Emma, he said carefully. Why didn't you just tell me? Why did you stop eating? His daughter's face crumpled. I tried, Daddy. The first week, I told you the garden was sad. You said it was okay, that we'd take care of it when we felt better. But I could feel her getting weaker. And I didn't know what Mom did exactly. I tried to remember, but I was always at school when Mom did the garden stuff. So I thought if I gave her my food instead, maybe that would help. But it didn't work. No. She got hungrier. And I got so tired. And I was scared that if I told you the truth, you'd think I was seeing things that weren't there, and you'd be even more worried, and everything was already so broken, Daddy. Everything was so broken, and I didn't know how to fix any of it. Marcus pulled his daughter into his arms, feeling her fragile body shake with sobs. Oh, sweetheart. I'm so sorry. I've been so lost in my own grief that I didn't see what you were carrying. But we're going to figure this out together, okay? We're going to help her. And we're going to help each other. That afternoon, Marcus did something he hadn't done since Catherine died. He opened her journal. She'd kept it in the nightstand, and he'd been unable to touch it, unable to face the intimacy of her private thoughts. But if there were answers about the garden keeper, they would be there. He found them on page after page. Catherine had documented everything. The first time she'd sensed the presence in the garden, 3 years after they'd moved into the house. How she'd researched folklore and old gardening traditions, trying to understand what she was experiencing. The experiments she'd conducted, learning what sustained the creature, what made it thrive. It's not quite real and not quite unreal, Catherine had written. It exists in the space between belief and growing things. It's fed by attention, by love, by the intention we put into nurturing life. When I tend the garden with care, when I sing to the plants and feed the soil, I'm feeding her too. She makes everything grow stronger in return. It's a partnership, a kind of magic that happens when you really, truly care for a piece of earth. There were recipes. Instructions for the moon water Emma had mentioned. Lists of songs that Catherine had discovered the garden keeper responded to. Detailed notes about the seasonal rhythms of the garden and how the creature's needs changed throughout the year. But it was the last entry that made Marcus's hands shake. Catherine had written it the day before she died. Emma is starting to sense her. Yesterday she asked me why the roses sing. My beautiful, sensitive daughter. I need to teach her everything, prepare her to be the next keeper of this garden. We'll start this weekend. I'll show her how to make the honey water, how to listen to what the plants need, how to feel the garden keeper's presence. This magic needs to be passed down, protected. It's too precious to lose. Catherine had never gotten that weekend. And Emma had been left trying to figure it out alone, with tragic results. That evening, Marcus and Emma worked together in the garden for the first time since Catherine's death. Following the journal's instructions, they mixed honey water in a blue ceramic bowl and placed it among the roses as the sun set. They buried apple cores and coffee grounds, singing one of Catherine's favorite songs as they worked. It felt absurd and beautiful and heartbreaking all at once. As darkness fell, the shimmer grew stronger. Marcus could see it now, really see it. It was roughly the size of a child, with features that seemed to shift between human and plant, between solid and transparent. Where it moved, flowers turned their faces to follow. Where it touched, leaves unfurled and stems straightened. It approached the blue bowl and seemed to drink, though Marcus couldn't quite track how. But he could feel the gratitude radiating from it, a wordless thank you that brought tears to his eyes. "She's getting stronger," Emma whispered, wonder in her voice. "I can tell. She's not so hungry anymore." That night, for the first time in 2 weeks, Emma ate dinner. Just a little. Some soup and half a piece of bread. But she ate. And afterward, she smiled at Marcus across the table, a real smile that reached her eyes. "We're going to be okay, aren't we, Daddy?" she said. Marcus reached across and squeezed her hand. "Yeah, baby. I think we are." The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it happened. Day by day, as Marcus and Emma tended the garden together, as they learned the rhythms and rituals Catherine had practiced, both the garden keeper and Emma grew stronger. The correlation was impossible to ignore. The more they fed the creature, the more Emma ate. As the garden bloomed back to life, so did his daughter. Marcus found himself becoming obsessed with understanding it. Late at night, after Emma was asleep, he'd sit at the kitchen table with Catherine's journal and his laptop, researching the folklore of nature spirits and garden guardians. He discovered stories from every culture, every corner of the world. The Romans had called them lares, protective spirits of place. The Japanese knew them as kodama. Celtic traditions spoke of the Side who dwelt in ancient groves and wild gardens. Every tradition said essentially the same thing. These beings existed in the liminal space between the physical and spiritual world. They were sustained not by material food but by attention, intention, and love. They thrived where humans cultivated beauty and life with genuine care. And when neglected, when their sacred spaces were abandoned or destroyed, they faded. Sometimes they died. Their garden keeper had been dying. Slowly, painfully starving for the attention and care Catherine had provided. And somehow, through a connection Marcus didn't fully understand, Emma had felt that hunger as her own. His daughter's refusal to eat hadn't been a symptom of grief or mental illness. It had been empathy so profound it had nearly killed her. Dr. Sarah Winters, the child psychologist, was skeptical when Marcus tried to explain during their next appointment. He'd thought carefully about how much to reveal, ultimately deciding on a version of the truth that wouldn't get Emma institutionalized. "She's been worried about her mother's garden," Marcus said carefully. "Catherine put a lot of love into it, and Emma felt responsible for keeping it alive after she died. The pressure became overwhelming. But now we're tending it together, and Emma's feeling much better." Dr. Winters made notes, her expression neutral. Displacement of grief onto a concrete task can actually be quite healthy. Gardening is therapeutic. The act of nurturing living things, seeing tangible results from your care, can be very healing. She looked at Emma, who sat quietly beside Marcus. "How are you feeling about eating now, Emma?" "Better," Emma said simply. "When the garden is happy, I'm happy. When the garden is hungry, I feel hungry for it. But now Daddy knows how to feed it properly, so it's not hungry anymore." The psychologist's pen paused. "Feed it? You mean water it and fertilize it?" "Sure," Emma said with the kind of studied casualness that children use when they're hiding something. "That's what I mean." Marcus saw the doctor's eyes narrow slightly, but she didn't push. After the session, she pulled Marcus aside. "Her eating is improving, which is the most important thing. But this level of identification with the garden concerns me. Keep monitoring it. If she starts to regress, or if her attachment becomes more obsessive, we may need to intervene more directly." Marcus nodded, knowing they'd never understand. How could they? He barely understood it himself, and he could see the garden keeper with his own eyes now, could feel its presence like a warm current in the air whenever he stepped outside. The garden itself was becoming extraordinary. Plants that should have been dormant in late winter were blooming. The roses had never been more spectacular, with colors so vivid they almost hurt to look at. Vegetables that Catherine had planted last fall, which Marcus had assumed were dead, suddenly pushed through the earth in impossible abundance. The neighbors started commenting, asking what kind of fertilizer they were using, what was their secret. Marcus would just smile and say his wife had known what she was doing. Which was true, as far as it went. Emma grew stronger every day. The hollows in her cheeks filled out. The dark circles under her eyes faded. She started laughing again, playing again, being a child again. But she was also different now, changed by what she'd been through. There was a seriousness to her, a depth of understanding that seemed too old for 8 years. She could sense things about the garden that Marcus couldn't. She'd walk through the beds and know exactly where the garden keeper wanted something planted. She could feel when a plant was struggling before it showed any visible signs. She'd place her hand on the soil and close her eyes, and Marcus would watch his daughter's face shift as she listened to something he couldn't hear. "Mom left us something precious, didn't she?" Emma said one evening as they worked together, planting seeds for spring vegetables. The garden keeper drifted nearby, more visible than ever before, almost solid in the golden light of sunset. "She did," Marcus agreed. "But it's not just the garden keeper. It's the knowledge of how to care for her. The understanding that magic happens when we tend things with love." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Dr. Winters thinks I'm making it all up. That I created an imaginary friend to deal with Mom dying. Does that bother you?" "No. I know what's real." "You know what's real. The garden keeper knows what's real. That's enough." Emma patted the soil around a seedling, then looked up at Marcus with those dark eyes so much like Catherine's. "Do you think Mom knew? That this would help us after she was gone? That taking care of what she loved would help us remember how to love again?" Marcus felt his throat tighten. Trust Emma to cut straight to the heart of it. "I think your mom knew a lot of things. She was the smartest person I ever met. And yeah, maybe she knew that this garden would be a way for us to still be connected to her. To still feel her presence." The garden keeper seemed to pulse at that, and Marcus felt a wave of warmth wash over him. Not just warmth. Love. Catherine's love, somehow preserved and transmitted through this impossible being she'd nurtured. That night, Marcus did something he'd been avoiding for months. He went into the garage and found Catherine's gardening tools. Her gloves, still molded to the shape of her hands. Her favorite trowel with the wooden handle she'd worn smooth with use. Her pruning shears and her sun hat and her knee pads. He brought them into the house and laid them on the kitchen table. Emma found him there, touching each item gently, tears streaming down his face. She didn't say anything. She just climbed into his lap like she used to when she was smaller, and they held each other and cried for what they'd lost. But this time, the grief felt different. Not the crushing, suffocating weight it had been before. This was cleaner, purer. It was grief that acknowledged the love behind it, that honored what Catherine had been to them. "We're going to use her tools," Marcus said finally. "We're going to keep her garden alive. Not just for the garden keeper, but for us. For her memory. Deal?" "Deal," Emma whispered. Spring came early that year, or perhaps it was the garden keeper's magic that made it seem so. By March, the garden was a riot of impossible color and abundance. The local newspaper wanted to do a feature on it. Marcus politely declined, knowing there was no way to explain what was really happening without sounding completely insane. But word spread anyway. Neighbors would find excuses to walk past the house, to catch a glimpse of the extraordinary garden that had seemingly come back from the dead. Some of them would stop and comment to Marcus or Emma, marveling at the beauty, asking questions they couldn't answer truthfully. Mrs. Rodriguez from 3 houses down came by one Saturday morning with tears in her eyes. "I was friends with Catherine," she said. "We used to talk about gardening. She'd give me cuttings and advice. I just wanted to say it makes my heart so happy to see you've kept her garden going. She loved it so much." After she left, Emma looked at Marcus thoughtfully. "Maybe we should share it. The garden. The way Mom used to. She'd give people flowers and vegetables. She'd help them with their own gardens. Maybe the garden keeper would like that. Being part of the neighborhood again, the way she was when Mom was here." Marcus considered this. The garden keeper had grown strong now, vibrant and present. Maybe it was time to expand their circle, to honor Catherine's generosity. So they started having people over. Small groups at first. Marcus would give tours of the garden, sharing Catherine's techniques, offering cuttings and seeds. Emma would lead children through the beds, showing them how to plant things, how to listen to what the plants needed. And the garden keeper, invisible to all but the two of them, would dance among the visitors, seeming to revel in the attention and appreciation. Something unexpected happened. The more people who loved the garden, the stronger the garden keeper became. And the more powerful she grew, the more the magic spread. Neighbors who took cuttings home found their own gardens thriving with unusual vitality. Children who helped Emma plant seeds discovered they had green thumbs they'd never suspected. The whole street seemed to bloom with new life and color. Marcus started documenting everything in a journal of his own, continuing the work Catherine had begun. He wrote about the garden keeper's preferences and patterns. He recorded which songs seemed to strengthen her most, which offering she responded to best. But he also wrote about the bigger lessons. "I'm learning that grief and love aren't opposites," he wrote one night. "They're two sides of the same thing. We grieve because we loved. And we can love again, in new ways, without betraying what we lost. Emma and I are feeding the garden keeper, but really we're feeding our own capacity to care, to nurture, to find magic in the everyday act of tending living things. Catherine left us this gift, and in accepting it, we're learning how to live again." By summer, Emma was thriving. Her weight was back to normal, her energy boundless. She'd made friends with several children in the neighborhood through the garden visits. They'd created a kids' gardening club that met every Saturday morning. Emma was the unofficial leader, teaching them the techniques Catherine had known, though she was careful about what she revealed about the garden keeper. "Some magic is private," she explained to Marcus. Mom knew that. She didn't tell everyone about the garden keeper. Just the people who could see it. Who were ready to see it. "And how do you know who's ready?" Marcus asked, curious about his daughter's wisdom. "You can tell by how they touch the plants. Whether they really pay attention or if they're just going through the motions. The garden keeper can tell too. She shows herself to people who really, truly care." As if summoned by their conversation, the garden keeper materialized beside them. She was more solid now than she'd ever been, almost fully visible even in broad daylight. Her features were clearer too, and Marcus could see what looked like Catherine's influence in her face. Or perhaps it was just that she reflected back the love Catherine had poured into this garden, and so she wore traces of that love in her form. She reached out, and Emma took her hand without hesitation. Marcus watched his daughter and this impossible creature stand together in the garden, surrounded by blooming abundance, and felt a peace he hadn't experienced since Catherine died. They were going to be okay. More than okay. They were going to thrive, just like the garden. That evening, Marcus sat on the back porch with a glass of Catherine's favorite wine, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. Emma was inside doing homework, and the garden keeper drifted among the roses, humming a melody that might have been one of Catherine's songs. His phone rang. It was his boss, asking when he planned to come back to work. Marcus had been on leave for so long, they needed to know his intentions. He looked at the garden, at the magic he and Emma had cultivated here, at the life they were building from the ashes of their grief. "I'll be back Monday," he said. "But I'll need flexible hours. I have responsibilities at home now. Important ones." After he hung up, he realized he was smiling. He had a plan forming, a vision of how to integrate everything he'd learned. He could design buildings, yes. But he could also design gardens. He could create spaces that honored the magic of growing things, that made room for the impossible beauty that happened when humans tended the earth with love and intention. Emma joined him on the porch, leaning against his shoulder. "What are you thinking about, Daddy?" "The future," Marcus said. "How we're going to carry forward what your mom taught us. How we're going to keep feeding what matters." "The garden keeper," Emma said. "Yes. But also ourselves. Our capacity for wonder. Our ability to believe in magic even when the world tells us we shouldn't. Our willingness to tend and nurture and care, even when it's hard, even when we're tired, even when it feels like we've lost everything." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the garden keeper move through the twilight garden. Marcus thought about the past months, about how close they'd come to losing everything. About how his daughter's refusal to eat had seemed like the end but had actually been the beginning of understanding something profound. We all need to feed what we love, he thought. We all need to tend the magic in our lives, whatever form it takes. When we stop doing that, when we neglect what matters most, we begin to starve in ways that go deeper than physical hunger. Daddy? Emma's voice was soft. Do you think Mom knows? That we figured it out? That we're taking care of her garden and her garden keeper? Marcus pulled his daughter close. Yeah, sweetheart. I think she knows. I think that's why she left us the journal, all those detailed notes. She wanted to make sure we'd have what we needed to keep the magic alive. To keep growing, even after she was gone. The garden keeper floated closer, and for just a moment, Marcus could swear he saw Catherine's smile in the shimmer of her form. Then she faded back into the roses, leaving only the sweet scent of blooms and the whisper of leaves in the evening breeze. Marcus and Emma sat on the porch until the stars came out, planning tomorrow's gardening tasks, talking about what seeds they'd plant next, discussing which neighbors they'd invite to visit. Making plans for a future that honored the past while embracing new growth. For 2 weeks, his daughter had refused to eat, and Marcus had thought he was losing her forever. But Emma had been trying to save something precious, something worth starving for. And in the end, they'd all been saved together, learning that the deepest hunger isn't for food at all, but for connection, for purpose, for the kind of love that transcends death and blooms eternal in the gardens we tend with our whole hearts.